It was a quiet evening on a distant, dusty planet. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the small settlement at the edge of the desert. A lone mechanic worked in his workshop, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing through the empty streets. He had spent years fixing old machines, engines, and tools that no one else wanted to touch. Life was simple, predictable, and lonely, but he preferred it that way. Until that day, nothing unusual had ever crossed his path. The sound of a distant crash broke the calm. Sparks flew in the distance as a strange ship fell from the sky, twisting and burning before landing in a shallow crater not far from the settlement. Most people would have stayed inside, too afraid to approach, but the mechanic's curiosity was stronger than fear. He grabbed his tools, a small bag of supplies, and walked toward the smoke dot. As he reached the wreck, the smell of burning metal and alien fuel filled the air. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen, shapes and designs that seemed alive, with glowing lines running across the surface. He carefully stepped over debris, his eyes scanning for survivors. That's when he noticed a small figure moving among the wreckage. At first, he thought it was an injured animal, but as he got closer, he realized it was a creature like nothing he had ever seen. It was a young alien dragon, no bigger than a large dog, but with scales that shimmered in strange colors. Its wings were small and folded, and its eyes glowed with intelligence and fear. It had clearly survived the crash, but was badly hurt. The mechanic's heart went out to the little creature. He had no idea what it was, or where it had come from, but he knew he couldn't leave it there to die. The creature hissed, showing tiny, sharp teeth, but it didn't attack. It was wary, confused, and hurt. The mechanic slowly extended a hand, talking softly, trying to gain its trust. After a tense moment, the dragon shivered and let out a small whine, as if asking for help. Carefully, he lifted it from the wreckage and carried it back to his workshop. Back in the workshop, he cleaned the dragon's wounds, using bandages and antiseptics from his first aid kit. The dragon was small and fragile, but it had a presence that made the mechanic feel both wonder and unease. He had never seen anything like it, and yet he couldn't ignore the responsibility of caring for it. He fed it a mixture of protein-rich paste and fresh water, watching as the creature slowly began to trust him. Over the next few days, he observed the dragon closely. He realized it wasn't an ordinary animal. Its eyes followed every movement, and it seemed to understand simple instructions. It was curious, intelligent, and surprisingly fast. Even when it was weak from its injuries, it tried to move with a grace that amazed him. At night, the dragon would rest in a corner of the workshop, watching him with glowing eyes, as if trying to understand who he was. He soon learned that the dragon was no ordinary alien. Rumors among traders and explorers had hinted at creatures like this rare dragons, often rejected by their own kind if they didn't meet certain standards. The mechanic didn't care about its origins. He only knew that it was alive, hurt, and in need of someone who would care. And in that quiet workshop, surrounded by tools and scrap metal, a bond began to form between the human and the alien. As the days passed, the mechanic started to teach the dragon small lessons. He showed it how to avoid hazards in the workshop, how to move carefully, and even how to respond to basic commands. The dragon was eager to learn, and it quickly picked up on everything. The mechanic was amazed at its intelligence and adaptability. He could see that this little outcast had the potential to grow into something extraordinary, something far beyond what anyone expected. But he also knew that raising it would not be easy. It was rejected by its own kind, which meant it carried a weight of loneliness and fear. It had survived a crash, injury, and abandonment. Yet it was still alive, still curious, and still willing to trust. The mechanic felt a mix of pride and concern. He was shaping the life of a creature that could one day be dangerous. But he also knew that with guidance and care, it could become remarkable. Sometimes he would sit back and watch the dragon explore the workshop, its small wings twitching as it tested its strength. He would talk to it, not knowing if it could understand the words, but believing that his presence mattered. Slowly, the creature began to respond, leaning into him when he touched it, following him as he moved around, and even attempting playful gestures that showed its growing confidence. One evening, after a long day of cleaning, feeding, and teaching, the mechanic stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and purple hues. He looked back at the dragon, resting quietly in the corner of the workshop, and felt a strange mixture of hope and worry. He had saved this life, but he knew this was only the beginning. This dragon was not just a creature in need. It was a being with a mind, with potential, and with the ability to change everything he thought he knew about the universe. In that moment, he made a silent promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would protect this dragon. He would teach it, guide it, and help it grow. And perhaps, in doing so, he would discover more about himself than he had ever imagined. This small, injured, rejected dragon had entered his life unexpectedly, but it would not leave it unchanged. And so, the quiet workshop became a place of new beginnings. Metal and tools surrounded them, but in the center of it all, a human and a dragon were beginning a journey that neither could have predicted. A bond was forming, fragile yet strong, a bond that would shape the destiny of both the mechanic and the dragon. The dragon had survived the crash, and the mechanic had saved its life, but survival was only the first step. Over the next few weeks, he dedicated himself entirely to raising the creature. Every day he watched it carefully, learning how it moved, how it reacted to his voice, and how it responded to different situations. The dragon was clever beyond his expectations. It observed everything, noticing details most humans would overlook, and it seemed to learn from the smallest mistakes or successes. Feeding the dragon became a ritual. The mechanic experimented with different types of food, making sure it received enough energy to heal and grow. The dragon quickly learned which foods it preferred, and sometimes even indicated what it wanted by nudging or tapping with its small, clawed feet. Watching it learn so quickly fascinated him. He realized that this creature was not just intelligent, it was unusually perceptive, capable of understanding more than he could imagine. The mechanic began teaching it basic survival skills. He made small obstacle courses in the workshop, using old crates, metal beams, and spare parts. At first, the dragon was clumsy, tripping over the obstacles and struggling to balance. But it never gave up. Each day, it became steadier, more precise, and more confident. The mechanic encouraged it, speaking softly, praising every small success. He noticed a spark in its eyes, a mix of pride and determination. That made him realize this dragon would not remain small or weak for long. A dragon's personality began to emerge during these training sessions. It was curious and playful, but also cautious and careful. Sometimes it would test his patience, knocking over tools or hiding in corners, only to watch him react with sharp, intelligent eyes. The mechanic learned to respect its instincts, realizing that forcing it to obey would only make it fearful. Instead, he worked to guide it, teaching lessons in patience, understanding, and trust. In return, the dragon began to follow him, often mimicking his movements or anticipating his actions in small, surprising ways. One morning, the mechanic noticed the dragon attempting to climb the shelves in the workshop. Its small wings flapped awkwardly, and its claws dug into the metal and wood, but it did not succeed at first. The mechanic smiled and offered gentle encouragement, creating a small ramp and guiding it carefully. The dragon tried again, determined not to fail. When it finally reached the top, it let out a small, triumphant roar. The mechanic felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. It was a simple moment, but it showed him how far the dragon had already come. The dragon also began to respond to his emotions. When the mechanic was frustrated or tired, it would stay close, almost as if offering comfort. When he laughed or celebrated small victories, the dragon would tilt its head and make quiet, curious noises. This connection deepened their bond, making it clear that their relationship was more than just caretaker and creature. It was mutual respect, understanding, and trust. As the dragon grew stronger, the mechanic realized it was time to introduce more complex lessons. He wanted the dragon to understand more than just basic survival. He wanted it to think, strategize, and adapt. He started creating puzzles using pieces of scrap metal, containers, and hidden rewards. The dragon learned quickly, figuring out solutions in ways the mechanic had not expected. Sometimes it even seemed to anticipate his intentions, moving before he could complete the action himself. These moments amazed him. He had saved a life, but it felt as though the dragon was teaching him, too. Despite its growth, the dragon still carried the weight of rejection. It would sometimes retreat, curling up in a corner of the workshop, scales shimmering with a soft, uncertain glow. The mechanic recognized the sign's hesitation, fear, and a sense of being out of place. He would sit quietly beside it, speaking softly, letting the dragon know it was safe, accepted, and valued. Gradually, the creature responded, leaning into him or nuzzling his hand. The mechanic realized that patience and understanding were just as important as teaching strength or skill. Outside the workshop, the world remained unaware of the creature growing in strength and intelligence. The small settlement continued its quiet life, with traders and wanderers moving through, oblivious to the presence of a dragon being raised in secret. Occasionally, the mechanic would take the dragon outside for short walks, letting it explore the open air while keeping it safe from prying eyes. These trips were important for its development. The dragon learned to navigate terrain, recognize sounds and smells, and observe the environment for potential dangers. During one such walk, a small group of children approached the workshop, curious about the strange noises and occasional glimpses of movement. The dragon froze, its body tense, eyes glowing. The mechanic quickly stepped between the children and the creature, gently but firmly guiding them back. The dragon relaxed only when it recognized the mechanic's calm presence. This incident reminded him of the power of the dragon and the responsibility he carried. He was not just raising a creature, he was raising a being with incredible potential, one that required careful guidance to prevent harm to others or itself. The dragon's wings began to grow, small but strong. The mechanic started teaching it how to flap and balance, first inside the workshop, then in safe, open areas. The lessons were slow and careful. The dragon often stumbled, hitting walls or nearly falling, but it never gave up. The mechanic provided support, encouragement, and the occasional demonstration. Slowly, the dragon learned to glide short distances, its body moving with a grace that belied its awkward size. The mechanic felt a mixture of awe and caution. He knew that one day, these wings would carry the dragon far beyond his control. At night, the mechanic would sit beside the dragon, reflecting on how far it had come. He thought about the crash, the injuries, and the rejection it had faced. He thought about the bond that had grown between them and the lessons they had learned together. He understood that the dragon was not just surviving, it was thriving. It was learning, growing, and becoming something remarkable. And he realized that, in some ways, he had changed too. Caring for this creature had taught him patience, empathy, and a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The bond between them was more than survival. It was mutual respect and understanding. The dragon trusted him, and he trusted the dragon. Every day brought new challenges, teaching, guiding, observing, but also small victories, moments of joy, and a growing sense of wonder. The mechanic often marveled at how a creature once rejected and injured could become so strong, so intelligent, and so aware of the world around it. He knew that this was only the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the mechanic began to notice subtle changes. The dragon's eyes reflected not just intelligence, but curiosity, strategy, and even playfulness. Its movements were precise, its instincts sharp. It began to anticipate actions, not just react to them. And sometimes, when it looked at him, he felt as if it understood more than words could express. It was no longer a helpless creature. It was becoming something powerful, something that could survive in ways the mechanic could not yet imagine. He realized that raising the dragon was not just about survival or strength. It was about shaping a mind, guiding a creature rejected by its own kind into a being capable of thinking, learning, and adapting. The mechanic knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with lessons, mistakes, and discoveries. But he also knew that together they could face anything. The dragon had been given a second chance at life, and he had been given the responsibility and the honor of shaping that life in the quiet moments. When the workshop was still and the dragon rested at his feet, the mechanic felt a deep sense of connection. He had started this journey to save a life, but he had gained a companion, a student, and a partner in ways he had never expected. And though he did not yet know the full extent of what the future held, he was certain of one thing. This dragon, once rejected and alone, would grow into something extraordinary, and he would be there every step of the way to guide it, protect it, and witness its rise. The dragon had grown much stronger since the mechanic first found it. Its wings were no longer small. They stretched wide, shimmering in alien colors that seemed to change with every movement. Its claws had grown sharper, its tail longer and more powerful. Even its eyes, once filled with fear and hesitation, now held a spark of confidence and curiosity. The mechanic watched all of this with a mix of pride and concern. He had raised this creature, taught it to trust, and shown it the ways of survival, but he also knew that its abilities were growing faster than he could anticipate. One morning, the mechanic decided it was time to push the dragon further. He led it outside to the rocky terrain beyond the workshop. The desert stretched endlessly, dotted with jagged cliffs and scattered stones. The mechanic wanted the dragon to explore, to test its skills, and to learn more about the world beyond the workshop. At first, the dragon hesitated, glancing back at him as if asking for reassurance. He nodded gently, telling it with his presence alone that it was safe, and the dragon stepped forward, wings slightly spread, ready to face new challenges. The first test was simple, climbing a small cliff. The dragon struggled at first, its claws slipping on loose rocks, but it refused to give up. The mechanic stayed nearby, offering guidance when necessary, but mostly letting it figure things out on its own. Slowly, the dragon climbed higher, learning to balance its body and use its tail for support. When it finally reached the top, it roared softly, a sound of triumph and pride. The mechanic smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of its growth. Next came more complex challenges. He created a series of small obstacles, hiding objects behind rocks and teaching the dragon to use its intelligence as well as its strength. The dragon quickly learned to analyze its surroundings, to move carefully, and even to plan its moves ahead of time. Sometimes it would hesitate, staring at a rock or a gap as if thinking through the best approach. The mechanic realized that the creature was not just strong, it was clever, capable of reasoning and problem-solving in ways he had not anticipated. The dragon also began to develop instincts that went beyond simple training. It could sense changes in the wind, detect movement in the distance, and even recognize when the mechanic was worried or cautious. One day, as they were exploring a narrow canyon, the mechanic noticed a pack of wild alien predators lurking nearby. Before he could warn the dragon, it crouched low, its wings tucked tightly, and moved silently behind a boulder. The creatures passed without noticing them. The mechanic was amazed. The dragon was learning on its own, becoming a hunter, a protector, and a survivor all at once. As the dragon's strength grew, so did its playfulness. It began testing the mechanic in small ways, nudging him with its head, dropping stones near him, or performing sudden leaps and flaps to see how he would react. Sometimes it was mischievous, but the mechanic welcomed these moments. He knew that these tests were the dragon's way of learning boundaries, understanding his reactions, and exploring its own abilities. Their relationship was becoming a partnership, each learning from the other in subtle, meaningful ways. The mechanic also noticed that the dragon was beginning to communicate in small, deliberate ways. It would hiss, whistle, or emit short roars to express curiosity, excitement, or caution. The mechanic responded with simple gestures, guiding it, teaching it signals that allowed them to understand each other without words. This silent communication strengthened their bond, making them feel like a team. The dragon was not just following instructions, it was learning to cooperate, to strategize, and even to anticipate situations before they happened. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mechanic decided to test the dragon's hunting instincts. He placed a small mechanical prey in the distance, something that would move unpredictably and require the dragon to think. The dragon crouched low, its eyes focused, wings slightly open, tail twitching. It studied the movement carefully, then sprang forward with a speed and precision that startled the mechanic. It captured the prey perfectly, showing both intelligence and physical skill. He realized that the creature was no longer a passive learner. It was becoming an active problem solver, a predator in its own right. But growth was not without challenges. Sometimes the dragon's confidence made it reckless. It would leap from cliffs too high or chase shadows too far, ignoring warnings. The mechanic would intervene, calming it down, teaching patience and control. He knew that raw power without discipline could be dangerous, not just to the dragon, but to anyone around it. Slowly, through careful guidance, the dragon began to balance strength with caution, instinct with intelligence, and power with respect. As the weeks went by, the dragon became more aware of its surroundings. It could detect the smallest movements, hear distant sounds, and sense danger before it arrived. The mechanic noticed subtle changes in its behavior. It began to move with purpose, deciding its path rather than following him blindly. It started exploring on its own, returning only when it wanted guidance or approval. The mechanic felt a mix of pride and concern. He had raised a creature capable of extraordinary things, but he also understood that it could become unpredictable. Their relationship deepened during this time. The dragon had grown into a loyal companion, one that protected the mechanic as much as he protected it. They moved together through the desert, understanding each other in ways no words could convey. The mechanic realized that he had not only taught the dragon survival and intelligence, he had helped shape its character. It was learning empathy, patience, and trust, qualities rare in any predator, alien or human. One morning, as they rested near a quiet stream, the mechanic noticed the dragon, observing its reflection in the water. Its eyes, bright and intelligent, seemed to reflect an understanding of itself, of the growth it had achieved. The mechanic watched in awe. This creature, once rejected and alone, had transformed into a being capable of mastering its environment, thinking ahead, and even understanding relationships. The bond between them had become unbreakable, built on trust, guidance, and shared experiences. However, the mechanic knew that this was only the beginning. The dragon's abilities were growing rapidly, and with growth came responsibility. He realized that one day the dragon would face challenges beyond the workshop and desert. Other creatures, other forces, even its own kind, could threaten it. He had to prepare it not just for survival, but for confrontation, for strategy, and for the trials that lay ahead. So he continued to teach. Every day brought new lessons: flying longer distances, analyzing complex terrain, learning to hunt more effectively, and understanding the consequences of its actions. The dragon responded eagerly, often surprising the mechanic with creative solutions and unexpected strategies. Sometimes it would pause, observing him closely, as if gauging whether he approved. The mechanic understood that respect and trust had become mutual, that the dragon was not only learning, but choosing to follow his guidance willingly. By the end of this period, the dragon had changed in ways the mechanic could hardly have imagined. It had grown taller, stronger, and more intelligent. Its wings were capable of sustained flight, its claws precise and powerful, its mind sharp and strategic. The dragon had evolved from a scared, injured creature into a being capable of thinking independently, reacting quickly, and protecting those it cared for. The mechanic felt a mix of awe, pride, and caution. He had nurtured something extraordinary, but he also knew that the dragon's potential could one day surpass his control. As night fell over the desert, the dragon curled beside the mechanic in the quiet of the workshop. Its scales shimmered softly in the moonlight, eyes glowing with a mixture of loyalty and understanding. The mechanic stroked its head gently, realizing that their journey had only just begun. The dragon had tested its strength, learned to think, and discovered its abilities, but there were still greater challenges ahead. Challenges that would test both its mind and its power. The mechanic knew that the bond between them was more than survival. It was trust, respect, and shared experience. He had raised a creature rejected by its own kind, teaching it not only to survive, but to thrive, to think, and to become something extraordinary. And as he looked at the dragon, now powerful and alert, he understood that their journey was far from over. Together, they would face the unknown, and together, they would grow stronger. The quiet of the desert was broken one morning by a deep, low hum that vibrated through the ground. The mechanic looked up, sensing something unusual, and saw a massive ship descending from the sky, its shadow stretching over the rocky terrain. This was no ordinary craft. It moved with precision, elegance, and authority, the kind of presence that commanded respect and fear. And from it emerged a figure that sent a chill down the mechanic's spine. The alien empress, the very one who had rejected the dragon when it was young, small, and vulnerable. The mechanic knew instantly that this encounter could not be avoided. He had expected the day might come when the empress would search for the dragon, but he had hoped it would be far in the future when the creature was fully prepared. Now she had arrived, powerful, commanding, and surrounded by loyal warriors and smaller dragons that moved like shadows at her command. The desert seemed smaller under her presence, the wind sharper, the air heavy with tension. He glanced at the dragon, which had grown into a formidable creature under his care. Its wings were wide and strong, its scales shimmering in strange, brilliant patterns. Its eyes glowed with intelligence and alertness, and its tail flicked in measured anticipation. The mechanic could feel its heartbeat, fast but controlled. The dragon sensed the danger, but it did not cower. It trusted him, and it had learned the lessons he had carefully taught. It was ready, in its own way, to face this challenge. The empress spoke, her voice carrying without effort across the distance. Her tone was cold, sharp, and commanding. She demanded the return of the dragon, declaring that it belonged to her kind and that its rejection had been a mistake of circumstance, not of power. The smaller dragons flanked her, ready to attack at a moment's notice. The mechanic stood his ground, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. He had raised this creature, nurtured it, and guided it. He would not let it be taken without a fight. The dragon moved first. With a burst of speed, it leapt into the air, wings spreading wide, and circled the empress and her followers. It was a display of strength, agility, and intelligence, testing the reaction of the enemy. The smaller dragons lunged, but the creature anticipated their moves, weaving through the air with precision and avoiding every attack. The mechanic watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He had trained the dragon, but seeing it in action against its own kind, against experienced and deadly opponents, was different. This was the first real test of everything he had taught it. The Empress did not attack directly at first. She observed, analyzing the dragon, recognizing the skills it had developed. Her eyes, sharp and unforgiving, narrowed as she realized that the creature she had once rejected had grown beyond her expectations. This small, seemingly weak outcast had become a force she could not underestimate. The mechanic saw the moment of hesitation in her expression, and he knew the battle had already begun, not just in the air, but in the minds of everyone present. The smaller dragons surged again, moving in patterns, attempting to corner the outcast. But the dragon was smart. It did not rely solely on strength. It used strategy, learned patience, and precise timing. It anticipated attacks, used the terrain to its advantage, and even forced the smaller dragons to misstep, landing brief but calculated strikes to push them back. The mechanic could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The dragon was not just fighting. It was thinking, adapting, and controlling the battlefield in ways he had taught it to, yet even beyond what he had imagined. The Empress decided to intervene directly. She swooped down, her massive wings creating gusts of wind that threatened to knock the mechanic and his dragon off balance. The dragon met her head on, flapping with power, dodging and striking in a way that combined instinct with learned precision. Their movements were a blur, the clash of scales and claws echoing across the desert. The mechanic shouted encouragement, but mostly he watched, understanding that the dragon now had to rely on what he had taught it, on instincts honed through weeks of training and care. The battle was intense, but the dragon's loyalty to the mechanic gave it an edge the Empress could not predict. It moved not only to protect itself, but to shield the human who had saved it, nurtured it, and trusted it. Each strike, each dodge, and each maneuver demonstrated a combination of raw power, intelligence, and emotional connection. The mechanic felt a surge of pride and relief. This was the culmination of all their time together. Their bond was their strength, and it was proving stronger than he could have imagined. After a tense standoff, the Empress realized that direct combat would not win her the dragon. It was clever, cautious, and loyal in ways she had never expected. She saw that the creature had grown into more than just a survivor. It had become a strategist, a fighter, and a guardian. Slowly, she backed away, her followers retreating with her. She left with a message, a warning that this outcast would never be allowed to forget its origins, and that her eyes would always watch. But she had also been forced to acknowledge something unexpected. The dragon she had rejected had become extraordinary, more powerful than many of her own kind could ever be. The dragon circled back to the mechanic, landing gently beside him. Its wings folded against its body, but its eyes still glowed with alertness. It nudged him with its head, a gesture of recognition, reassurance, and perhaps even pride. The mechanic knelt, running his hands along its scales, feeling the warmth and strength that now radiated from the creature. This was no longer the injured, frightened outcast from weeks ago. It was a fully capable, intelligent being, ready for the challenges of the wider world. That night, they returned to the workshop. The mechanic reflected on the confrontation, understanding that this battle had not just been about strength. It had been about trust, loyalty, and growth. The dragon had proven itself in ways that words could not describe. It had faced rejection, injury, and fear, and now it had faced its own kind, emerging not only unscathed, but victorious in a way that was measured, intelligent, and controlled. The mechanic realized that the lessons they had learned together were far from over. The Empress's warning had made it clear that the world beyond the workshop would challenge the dragon in ways he could not fully predict. But for now, they had survived. They had strengthened their bond, proven their abilities, and gained a new understanding of what the dragon was capable of. And in that quiet moment, as the wind rustled through the desert and the stars began to shine, the mechanic knew that they had taken a step closer to the destiny that awaited them both, a journey that would demand courage, wisdom, and the unbreakable bond between human and dragon dot from that day on. The mechanic and the dragon moved with more purpose. The desert was no longer just a place to survive. It was a training ground, a proving ground, and a home for growth. The dragon had faced its past, confronted the power that once rejected it, and learned that strength came not only from muscles and wings, but from trust, strategy, and the connections that bind them to others. The mechanic smiled as he watched the dragon stretch its wings, knowing that together they had faced one of the greatest tests they would ever encounter. And he knew deep down that many more challenges awaited them in the future challenges that would test not just their strength, but their bond, their courage, and the extraordinary potential of the dragon he had raised. After the confrontation with the Empress, the mechanic knew that the dragon had grown, but he also understood that its full potential had not yet been realized. The desert, the cliffs, and the rocky terrain became their training ground. Every day, the mechanic pushed the dragon a little further, testing its strength, intelligence, and reflexes. He wanted it to master not only its physical abilities, but also its mind, its instincts, and its sense of strategy. The dragon had already shown extraordinary skill, but he knew it could become something far greater, something that would surpass even the expectations of its own kind. The first step was flight. The dragon's wings were strong now, capable of carrying it for longer distances, but the mechanic taught it precision, control, and endurance. He would release it from high cliffs, allowing it to glide through narrow passes, maneuver around rocks, and land with accuracy. At first, it struggled, sometimes hitting obstacles or losing balance, but with each attempt, it improved. The mechanic observed closely, adjusting the challenges and offering guidance when necessary. The dragon learned quickly, its movements becoming smooth, graceful, and confident. Next came speed and agility. The mechanic set up moving targets across the desert, small animals, mechanical prey, and objects that required sharp reflexes to capture. The dragon learned to anticipate movement, plan its path, and react instantly. Sometimes it failed, missing a target or stumbling over uneven ground, but it never gave up. Each failure was a lesson, each success a testament to its growing intelligence and adaptability. The mechanic felt a surge of pride every time the dragon outsmarted the challenge, knowing that these lessons were shaping it into a predator unlike any other. The dragon's senses were developing rapidly. Its hearing became acute enough to detect the smallest noises across the desert. Its sight could track movement at great distances, and its sense of smell could identify danger or opportunity long before it was visible. The mechanic took advantage of this, teaching the dragon to observe carefully, think critically, and make decisions based on logic rather than instinct alone. The creature began to act with strategy, not just reaction. It studied its environment, anticipated threats, and even calculated risks before moving. This intelligence, combined with its strength and agility, made it a formidable force in the wild. The mechanic also focused on discipline and control. The dragon had raw power, but without guidance, that power could become dangerous to itself, to the mechanic, and to others. He taught it to hold back, to observe first, and to choose its moments of action carefully. The dragon responded with surprising patience, understanding that restraint was a form of strength. Slowly, it became capable of controlling its impulses, using its abilities with precision, and even strategizing when faced with multiple challenges at once. One day, the mechanic decided it was time for a more complex test. He created a simulated hunting scenario using moving targets, obstacles, and hidden hazards. The dragon had to track, chase, and capture the targets without being detected, all while navigating dangerous terrain. The dragon approached the challenge cautiously, analyzing the environment before making a move. It darted, climbed, leaped, and swooped with skill that impressed even the mechanic. Every decision seemed calculated, every movement precise. By the end of the exercise, the dragon had succeeded flawlessly. The mechanic knew in that moment that it had become something extraordinary, a predator capable of outthinking, outmaneuvering, and overpowering nearly any opponent. The bond between them had deepened during these exercises. The dragon trusted the mechanic completely, following his guidance while also thinking independently. It would look to him for reassurance, but it no longer needed constant instruction. The mechanic recognized the intelligence and loyalty in its eyes, realizing that they were more than teacher and student. They were partners, connected by respect, trust, and shared experience. The dragon's loyalty was no longer just a product of care. It was a conscious choice, a reflection of the bond they had built together. As the dragon continued to grow, its power became undeniable. Its wings could carry it swiftly over mountains and valleys. Its claws could crush rock, and its tail could sweep aside obstacles with terrifying force. Its roar, once small and uncertain, now echoed across the desert, commanding attention and respect. The mechanic watched all of this with awe and caution. He had raised a creature of incredible power, but he also knew that power demanded responsibility. The dragon had learned loyalty and strategy, but it would soon need to face challenges far greater than anything the mechanic could simulate. To prepare for this, the mechanic focused on teaching the dragon the art of observation and patience. He showed it how to watch quietly, to wait for the perfect moment, and to strike with precision. The dragon learned to analyze not only its environment, but also the behavior of other creatures, other predators, and even humans. It began to think like a leader and a guardian, capable of understanding both threat and opportunity. These lessons were subtle but powerful, transforming it from a creature of raw instinct into a being capable of calculated, intelligent action. The dragon's growth also extended to its emotional understanding. It had learned to sense danger, fear, and trust, but it also began to display empathy and care. It would approach the mechanic when he was tired, nuzzle him gently, or sit quietly nearby during moments of reflection. The mechanic realized that this emotional intelligence was as important as physical power or strategic skill. The dragon's ability to connect, understand, and respond to emotions made it unique, creating a bond that could withstand even the greatest challenges. One afternoon, the mechanic led the dragon to the edge of a deep canyon. He wanted to test its courage and control under pressure. The dragon hesitated at first, wings trembling slightly, but it looked to him for guidance. With a gentle nod, he encouraged it forward. The dragon leapt, gliding over the canyon with perfect control, landing safely on the other side. It repeated the exercise several times, each attempt smoother, faster, and more confident than the last. The mechanic knew that the dragon had not only mastered its strength, but had also conquered fear, a crucial lesson for any predator in the wild. As the days passed, the dragon continued to refine its skills. It could strike with speed and precision, fly with endurance and grace, and think strategically in complex situations. Its body was powerful, its mind sharp, and its instincts refined. But what made it truly terrifying was the combination of these qualities with the bond it shared with the mechanic. The dragon had learned loyalty, trust, and strategy, qualities that made it not just strong, but unstoppable when fully committed. The mechanic often reflected on the journey they had shared. From the moment he found the injured, rejected dragon to this point, they had grown together. He had taught it survival, intelligence, and discipline, while the dragon had taught him patience, trust, and the limits of what was possible. Together, they had faced challenges, learned lessons, and transformed into a team unlike any other dot by the end of this period. The dragon had become the most terrifying predator in the desert. Its skills were unmatched, its intelligence remarkable, and its loyalty unwavering. But the mechanic knew that the ultimate test was still ahead. The Empress and her forces would not forget the outcast dragon, and the world beyond the workshop would demand that it prove itself once more. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of pride, watching the dragon stretch its wings under the setting sun, a creature that had grown from injury and rejection into something extraordinary in the quiet moments. As the dragon curled at his feet, the mechanic understood the truth of their journey. They had built not just a predator, but a being capable of shaping its destiny, guided by intelligence, loyalty, and trust. The dragon had become more than he had ever imagined, and he knew that the final chapters of their journey were still to come, chapters that would test their bond, their courage, and the terrifying power of the creature he had raised from nothing. Years had passed since the mechanic first found the injured, rejected dragon. The creature that had once been small, fragile, and uncertain had now grown into a massive, powerful predator, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its wings could carry it across mountains, its claws could tear through rock, and its intelligence allowed it to outthink even the most cunning adversaries. Yet, despite its terrifying power, it remained loyal to the mechanic who had raised it, guided it, and believed in it when no one else would. The mechanic watched the dragon carefully each day, aware that it had become a force of nature. Its presence alone commanded respect and fear. Nearby settlements whispered stories of a massive, glowing creature soaring across the skies, striking down threats with precision and disappearing before anyone could approach. Yet those who had witnessed the dragon in its natural state understood something deeper. It was not just a predator, it was a guardian, a protector, and a companion to the human who had nurtured it from the very beginning. The dragon's training had evolved over the years. It no longer required guidance for basic skills. It had mastered hunting, flying, and strategic thinking. Now, the mechanic focused on refining its instincts, helping it understand when to act, when to wait, and how to balance its incredible power with wisdom. The dragon learned to move silently across vast distances, to strike only when necessary, and to protect those it cared about without unnecessary destruction. It was a perfect combination of strength, intelligence, and discipline, a being shaped by careful guidance and mutual trust. Despite its fearsome abilities, the dragon maintained its connection to the mechanic. They had shared countless moments, from small victories in the desert to daring challenges against predators and threats from the unknown. The mechanic often marveled at how the dragon seemed to understand him without words, responding to his presence, emotions, and subtle gestures. Their bond was unshakable, built over years of trust, care, and shared experiences. It was this connection that made the dragon both terrifying and loyal. A force of nature guided by intelligence and compassion, the mechanic also realized that the dragon's legacy was not just about its power, but about what it represented. It was a symbol of resilience, of survival against rejection, injury, and fear. It had been cast aside by its own kind, injured by circumstances beyond its control, yet it had risen to become the most formidable creature in the galaxy. Its story inspired those who heard it, showing that even the weakest and most rejected could achieve greatness with guidance, patience, and determination. The galaxy began to take notice. Traders, explorers, and distant colonies whispered about the human who had raised a creature no one else could control. Stories spread of the dragon's cunning, strength, and loyalty. It became clear that this was no ordinary predator. It was a creature shaped by intelligence, strategy, and a bond that transcended species. The mechanic, once a simple tinkerer in a small workshop, had become the mentor of the most terrifying being anyone had ever seen. Yet he remained humble, understanding that the dragon's power was not his alone. It was the product of years of care, patience, and mutual growth. One day, as they rested near a high cliff, the mechanic reflected on their journey. He thought about the first moment he had lifted the injured dragon from the wreckage, about the long days of training, the mistakes, and the victories. He realized that raising the dragon had changed him as much as it had changed the creature. He had learned patience, empathy, and courage in ways he never imagined. And the dragon, in turn, had grown beyond rejection, fear, and weakness into a being capable of shaping its destiny. The dragon occasionally ventured far from the workshop, exploring mountains, deserts, and forests. It returned with stories of challenges overcome, predators outsmarted, and distant lands observed. Each journey strengthened its intelligence and instincts, and each time it returned, it greeted the mechanic with a mixture of pride, recognition, and loyalty. The mechanic knew that one day the dragon would face threats even he could not predict. But he also knew that it had the skills, wisdom, and instincts to survive and thrive. The Empress, who had once rejected the dragon, was still aware of its presence. She had watched from afar as the creature had grown beyond her expectations, becoming something she could neither control nor underestimate. The mechanic understood that challenges would continue, but he also knew that the dragon was ready. It had become a predator unlike any other, capable of facing threats from any corner of the galaxy. Yet it had chosen loyalty and connection over recklessness and destruction. The dragon's reputation grew with each passing year. Across settlements and trading posts, people spoke of it with a mixture of fear and admiration. It was known as the creature that could outthink, outmaneuver, and overpower anything that threatened the innocent or challenged it. And yet, those who saw it with the mechanic understood its true nature. It was a guardian, a protector, and a companion shaped by love, care, and guidance. In quiet moments, the mechanic would sit beside the dragon, reflecting on the life he had saved and nurtured. He remembered the days of struggle, the times the dragon had faltered, and the moments of triumph when it had soared into the sky with confidence and skill. He understood that they had not only survived, they had grown together, learned from one another, and created something extraordinary. The dragon had been rejected, injured, and alone, but it had found a purpose, a home, and a bond that made it more than a predator. The desert, once a place of survival, had become a stage for growth, training, and mastery. The dragon had transformed from a frightened outcast into a symbol of strength, intelligence, and resilience. Its legacy was not built on fear alone, but on loyalty, trust, and the bond it shared with the human who had believed in it when no one else would. Together, they had faced challenges, overcome adversity, and shaped a story that would be remembered for generations. As the sun set over the desert, casting golden light across the cliffs and sands, the dragon spread its wings and soared into the sky. Its flight was powerful, graceful, and confident, a testament to years of growth, training, and guidance. The mechanic watched, feeling pride and awe, knowing that this creature, once rejected and injured, had become the most terrifying predator in the galaxy, not through aggression alone, but through intelligence, strategy, and an unbreakable bond with the one who raised it. And in that moment, he realized that their journey, though long and filled with challenges, had created a legacy far greater than either of them could have imagined. The dragon had risen from rejection to greatness, guided by care, patience, and trust. The mechanic, once a simple human, had shaped the life of a creature feared and respected across the galaxy. Together, they had rewritten what it meant to survive, to grow, and to become extraordinary. Their story was one of loyalty, intelligence, courage, and the power of connection. The mechanic had saved a life, but in doing so, he had created something legendary. The dragon had been transformed from an outcast into the ultimate predator, yet it remained loyal, protective, and wise. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, the mechanic knew that their bond, their legacy, and their story would endure far beyond the desert, inspiring those who heard it and reminding the galaxy that even the rejected and abandoned could rise to greatness when given trust, guidance, and love.